Howdy, ma'am. So who does a white man like myself have to marry and murder to get some oil rights? Any takers? You're looking awfully pretty. Howdy, y'all, and welcome to my review for Killers of the Flower Moon. Based on David Grann's broadly lauded best-selling book, Killers of the Flower Moon is set in 1920s Oklahoma and depicts the serial murder of members of the oil-wealthy Osage Nation, a string of brutal crimes that came to be known as the Reign of Terror, a story of love, greed, and betrayal. Rated R. So first thing is first, this movie is a made-for-streaming movie. Just like Martin Scorsese's last film, The Irishman, was made for streaming. So that might be the reason for some of the issues that we're going to discuss later. But remember, according to Martin Scorsese, streaming content is not real cinema. Okay? All right, so let's just jump right into it. I know the number one thing people want to talk about is how long this movie is. It is 3 hours and I believe 27 minutes. But if I'm being 100% honest, it didn't feel like 3 hours to me. With Killers of the Flower Moon, I was actually engrossed for almost the entire movie with very little downtime. That doesn't mean that the movie is perfect for this length. I still feel like it could have been trimmed just a little bit here and there, and they probably could have cut a good 15, 20 minutes off this movie. They just got rid of some things that were unnecessary or things that didn't really contribute to the story. So there are three main stars of this movie. There is Lily Gladstone, she plays Molly Burkhart. Leonardo DiCaprio, who plays Ernest Burkhart, husband to Molly. And of course, Robert De Niro playing William Hale, who also goes by King in the movie. Now, I've never seen Lily Gladstone in anything, but I found her performance in this movie to be pretty darn good. She had this soft-spoken but really strong characteristics about her, where when she enters the room, people automatically respected her and they knew that she would hold her own against them. She was very family focused, always taking care of her mother and her sisters. She's kind of held together the whole Native American side of this story. The issue with this movie is that they completely sidelined her for about 70% of the movie, and it was very disappointing. This is a mild spoiler. She does get sick at some point, and then it's basically like Martin Scorsese just forgot she existed, and she just kind of pops up here and there, coughing a little bit, and is, I'm sick. And then Leonardo DiCaprio will help her out. But other than that, she really doesn't come back in to the movie until the final hour. So the whole center of the movie, she's just kind of MIA. And that's disappointing because she was one of the strongest actresses in the movie. Now moving on to Leonardo DiCaprio, who plays Ernest Burkhart. He was also very good. Some people are saying it's the best role of his life. I wouldn't say that, but he does give a very convincing performance. He's very dedicated to his family with Molly, and he's very dedicated to his uncle. He showed that type of conflicting emotions between his loyalty to both of them very well. Now, there is one thing about Leonardo DiCaprio's character that I was kind of confused about. So there's a lot of instances where he is just protruding his chin out and kind of doing this bulldog face. And he just does it for minutes at a time. And these are one of the things I think Scorsese could have cut out of the movie, because there's literal whole sequences of just zoomed in on Leonardo DiCaprio's face. And he's just for 15, 20 seconds. And it happens multiple times in the movie. And it's why do we need to see this? And what exactly is going on? They do mention in the beginning that he did fight in World War I. And he may have some issues from that, but it was never really hinted at all. I don't want to sound politically incorrect, but I'm just curious if maybe he had some type of mental disability, or if maybe he was on the autism spectrum. There's something off about his character, because he willingly goes along with any plan that somebody throws at him. So his uncle will tell him to go do something, and he says, "Yes, sir, I'll do it." And then his wife says, "I really need you here." And he goes, "Yes, ma'am, I'll help you." It makes no sense why he doesn't think for himself. There is one scene near the end of the movie where a lawyer tells him, people have been taking advantage of your demeanor, which kind of suggests that he may have some type of disability, kind of like a little bit of a Forrest Gump situation there. But they don't elaborate on it. There's really no other mention of it in the entire movie. So I thought that was a really weird angle to have in there. I don't know if the actual Ernest Burkhart had some type of disability. It just felt weird sometimes seeing DiCaprio do these type of actions. Now with Robert De Niro, you pretty much always know what you're going to get. You're going to get a tough guy who is good at scaring people just by looking at him. My main issue with De Niro is that he kept losing his southern accent, sometimes mid-sentence, and his New York accent would come out. And it was just kind of odd, and it kind of pulled me out of the movie sometimes, where he'll be giving a big speech and talking down here in his southern drawl and telling everybody, we have to be sure to protect our Indian brethren because they are family. And that family is why we're here together. If we don't have a family, it's about time that we take care of ourselves. And it was just so distracting to watch him fall in and out. Now, maybe it's because he's 80 years old. I don't know. I do think it's kind of weird that Scorsese just watched that and was like,
you know what? I don't like a guy who has two different accents from two different parts of the country speaking at once.
But other than that, I do think De Niro captured that kind of more soft-spoken, friendly tone, and then the kind of murderous rage behind the scenes. And of course, there were some great smaller cameo roles, which I didn't know were even going to be in the movie. John Lithgow, Brendan Fraser, Jesse Plemons. This movie was very nicely shot. The sets were great. The costumes were great. It really made you feel like you were back there in the 20s. There were some really cool scenes where the characters were getting their pictures taken, and then it would flash and it would show you the picture. And it looked very old-timey, and I really enjoyed that because it made it feel more historical as opposed to just a form of entertainment. Unfortunately, the soundtrack, which is very minimal, which is fine because it doesn't need a big booming soundtrack, was a little distracting because sometimes you just be in a scene where two characters are having a heartfelt conversation and you just hear the music's kind of picking up, but there's nothing happening, and then it just cuts to the next scene and the music stops. Like it felt kind of out of place, and you would just hear it over top of the dialogue, and it was really distracting. And again, it kind of pulled me out of the movie some. There was a lot of sound issues in this movie, aside from the score. Now, obviously, this movie has a lot of secretive conversations, so there's a lot of whispering and mumbling and side talking, which is perfectly fine. The problem is that capturing that sound just wasn't up to par. A lot of the times you wouldn't hear what some of the people were saying. It was harder to make out because all you would hear is the and just kind of made the story a bit harder to follow in certain areas. My main issue with the sound, though, has to be the dubbing. Some of the dubbing was so bad, it was almost laughable. And I don't know how it made it into the final cut of the film, but it was there. There were entire scenes that were ruined by very, very poor dubbing. The main one that sticks out to me is the one where King Hale is giving a speech to Ernest. And about halfway through the speech, the sound just gets hollow sounding. And it just sounds like somebody's re-recording it in the backseat of their car. And then he just put that into the movie. And Robert De Niro's lips don't match what he's saying. And then it switches back to the sound from the inside the room where they're actually having a conversation. It was so jarring. And again, it's one of those things just kind of pulled me from the movie. I don't know how it made it through the final cut, because Martin Scorsese is supposed to be this legendary savior of all cinema in the world. And it just ruins any type of tension or emotion that he's trying to create in the movie. But again, this is a direct-to-streaming movie, so maybe it's a streaming thing. Maybe the dubs weren't made to be heard through a movie theater sound system. Now, the entire movie isn't perfect. There are some artistic decisions I don't feel worked at all in this movie, and I don't know what Scorsese was thinking by having them in there. The first one of these issues are the title placard cards that appeared in the beginning of the movie. You know, those cards that appear and it says like, Act 1, the Osage Nation. So I thought that this movie was going to be broken up into acts. I was like, that makes sense, you know. Here's a background on the history of the people. Here's when trouble started. Here's a solution of the trouble. You know, maybe an hour each since it's a 3.5-hour movie. But that never happened. It just had the title placards in the beginning giving you some history, and then you never saw them again for the rest of the movie. Now, this could just be a skill issue for me.
Skill issue.
But some of the title placards I felt moved along too fast. Another decision that I didn't really understand was in the beginning of the movie, there was a scene where the natives struck oil, and it shows native men dancing in the oil. But the way it was shot, it made it seem more provocative and erotic than it should have been, and it was really off-putting to me. The filming style of that was a little too modern compared to how the rest of the movie was filmed. And the final glaring issue with this movie would be the ending. Now, I'm going to talk about the ending of the movie, not the ending story, but how it's presented. So, if you don't want to know how it's presented because you think it might be too much of a spoiler, then go ahead and either fast forward or mute, and then wait till this little phrase down here, spoiler, is gone, okay? and I'll wave you back in. So after kind of the culmination of the events of the movie, the screen goes black and we open up on a Radio City Music Hall type of situation where there's a live band, people doing sound effects with random objects, and actors on stage with scripts reading out parts of characters. There's a narrator that explains this is a true crime broadcast brought to you by the FBI and Lucky Strike cigarettes. And they kind of run through a couple scenes and they talk about what happens to the characters after the events of the movie. The problem with this is that it makes zero sense. You have this beautifully shot film of sweeping sceneries and emotional character arcs, and then you just kind of putter out and just, now you're inside of a music hall. And there's just so many weird zooming in on the instruments and the actors' faces that it's just giving too much of a modern vibe again, that it doesn't fit in with the tone of the rest of the movie. Which is weird, because you spend 3.5 hours watching something and then it's like, boom, here's something completely different and nonsensical. And to top it all off, there is a random cameo by the director Martin Scorsese himself. It just felt so weird and out of place. I literally sat there with my mouth open like, what on earth is going on? He kind of shuffles out on the stage and he reads a prepared statement off a piece of paper. And it's just giving you 5th grader student vibes where he's sitting there holding a piece of paper, reading it to the audience. And he doesn't have any type of bravado to him. Now, it's not his fault what his voice sounds like. I mean, my voice doesn't have much bravado either. But it's supposed to be this epic conclusion to the movie. And you just have him standing there reading these lines with no emotion, with no heart, and he's just there. And it kind of feels like a type of hubris of putting yourself in your movie to kind of pat yourself on the back. Fortunately, there's a really nice little palate cleanser after this 5th grade book report scene where we get to focus more on the Osage people and their art and culture. It's very brief, and it's not enough to make you forget what Scorsese just did, but at least it's a very positive note to kind of end on. Come on back, the spoilers are gone. So now the moment you've all been waiting for, the rating. It's very hard to rate this movie simply because there's so much good in this movie. There's so much great, dedicated filmmaking. There's so many great performances by the actors in it. And then there's just those glaring mistakes of sound issues of that 5th grader reading at the end that just kind of really diminish the effort that Martin Scorsese put into this movie. Again, I don't know if it's because this is a direct-to-streaming movie, if that's why there's so many issues like that and creative issues. Maybe Apple TV, the people who produced this movie, maybe they had different directions they wanted him to take. I want to give the movie like an 8.5, 9, just because I really did enjoy it, despite all those flaws. But some of those flaws are just kind of unforgivable in today's modern cinema, especially since this is supposed to be the savior of all cinema movies. So I'm gonna have to give it more so a 6.5, 7. The issues were just too much, and they just kind of took away from the overall aesthetic of the movie. That ending is really unforgivable. But maybe this is why Martin Scorsese says that streaming content is not real cinema. Maybe he was just trying to prove his own point. So, did you see Killers of the Flower Moon? If so, let me know what you thought about it down in the comments below. And of course, if you don't mind, please like, comment, and subscribe so I can continue to bring you knee-slappingly great content just like this. Time for me to mosey on out, so I'll catch you on the flip side. Yeah!